Welcome everyone to episode 18 of the Inclusion Conversation. So the Inclusion Conversation is a monthly talk show where we talk about different topics so that we can break down borders and bring the world closer together, one conversation at a time. My name is Solène. I'm the founder of Be Beyond Borders, and I'm the host of the Inclusion Conversation. My pronouns are she and her, and a visual description. I'm a white woman in her mid-30s. I have long, wavy, light brown hair, and today I'm wearing a bright blue dress with big white dots on it. And I'm originally from France. I live currently in Tooting in the UK, and we have many people from the UK joining us live tonight. So this is the flow of the hour that we're going to be spending together. The first half hour, we're going to have a conversation with Joanna Grace, who is our guest. We're going to be talking about sensory conversations. And then the second half, and that's recorded, then we can share it with friends, family members who might be interested and who might benefit from learning from our guests tonight. And then the second half of the conversation is off the record. We'll stop recording and we'll have questions and answers for anyone joining live tonight. So thank you so much to all of you who are in the virtual room right now. We're really looking forward to this part. This is my favorite part. So if you have any questions that come to your mind, write them down, put them in the chat, or just raise your hand as soon as we stop the recording, and we'll be taking questions. And even if you want to share your own experience, is very, very welcome in this space. So without further ado, I'm welcoming Joanna to the conversation. Thank you for joining us. Would you like to tell us a bit more about you?
Thanks very much for having me. I shall do a visual description for you like you've just done. So I'm also a white woman. I have got long brown hair, but mine is very, very tightly tied up in order to survive the heat. And I am currently dressed in pink and flirty blue and flowers. I look like I might run a yoga retreat, but I don't. Oh, and I'm supposed to tell you something serious as well, aren't I? So I run a thing called the Sensory Projects, and I'm currently a doctoral researcher studying identity and belonging for people with profound intellectual disabilities, profound intellectual and multiple disabilities.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you for doing also the visual description. That's very, very helpful. So how did we come across each other? Actually, a while back, you reached out to me and you said, hey, Solène, as part of your conversations, you're not including everybody because currently, you know, there is no voice and representation for people with profound intellectual and multiple disabilities. So I said, let's do this. Let's, you know, find a way to do this. And I know you have got a little video prepared. So, but tell us a bit more. What prompted you in the first place to reach out and talk about want to talk about this on the show?
If I answer that question in full, that will be the only question you get to ask me. But so we have seen since the late 80s, early 90s, we've seen tremendous progress with the disability rights movement under sort of the clarion cry of nothing about us without us. And that has affected, I'm thinking about it as a researcher. It's affected research enormously, but it's affected, you know, politics, it's affected advertising. We see the impact of that all over the place. And disabled people, hopefully now, are not so often subjected to being objects of pity, but are viewed as agentic people who, you know, can do stuff and have opinions just as anybody else would have. But a lot of that movement has been created and fueled by disabled people who are able to articulate things for themselves, or who can articulate things for themselves with the right support in you know, or can use standardized forms of communication or assistive technology to communicate. And all of that has been absolutely fantastic. And I have absolutely nothing against that. And so to say that people are being excluded sounds a bit harsh, because they're not actively being excluded. It's just they haven't been taken along on that ride. So we now hear from disabled voices, and we expect to hear from disabled voices, and we know that it is right to hear from disabled voices. But the people who have the most profound intellectual disabilities are still unheard from. They get described in the research as the missing voices, and so they are the missing voice, and they're the missing voices from. Although, as of today, hopefully we can. I obviously am not somebody with a profound intellectual disability, so we're not perfectly doing it, but we're pointing to those missing voices, and by pointing to what's missing, that's a stepping stone.
Brilliant, thank you for sharing. And did you want to show us the video to
You're pushing ahead.
invite one of these missing voices?
Well, it's a nice video. It's relevant to something that I think you'll ask me about later, but I can show you it now. So I'm trying to do inclusive research, and that stuff that I was just saying about the disabled rights movement having had such terrific impact over the last 2 decades. Within research, we see that impact with the rise of inclusive research practices. So if you go back 20, 30 years, maybe a bit more than that, let's go 50, research that involves people with disabilities is done on them, like in the way that we do research on animals. Things are tested on them. It's terrific. And we realized in the late 70s, that we shouldn't be doing that, which is a good spot. And so we moved from doing research on people to doing it for them. So in some regards, we were still doing research on people, but we were only doing it if it was stuff for them, like we're testing people's medications on them or something like that. And then there is a move on from that says, no, hang on a minute, it should be like properly for, we should find out what people want us to, rather than the researchers deciding what the questions are, we should find out what this demographic of people want the questions to be for, and we should work for them. We should, do this for them, find out answers that they're interested in. And then the sort of step up from that is, actually, why is it just us doing it? Why shouldn't we be doing it with them? And then you have incredible people, and I was going to list some people then, but if I list people, I will definitely forget people that I should have named and then kick myself because this is a recorded thing. But the top of my list, as I was saying that, were people like Jan Walmsley and Melanie Nind, who is my supervisor, so I'm obviously not going to forget her, who have made these developments in inclusive research. And when you look at the history of inclusive research, you see all sorts of like really lovely things happening. Like you look at people with a moderate learning disability being involved in aspects of the research process, being like consulted as to what the question would be. You see moves to have them be a part of analysing the data. You have people saying they can be a part of research at every stage of the process. And then the write-ups of these research endeavours show that there is an added value to doing that work collaboratively, that we learn more when people with disabilities are involved as researchers. And also for the people with disabilities, they get a lot out of being a part of that, which is fantastic. But of course, research runs on a funding model. And so inclusive research is a really relevant, important, fantastic thing. And so you get funding bodies that say, if you're doing research about people with disabilities, it must be done inclusively, which is great. But then they have to stipulate what that inclusivity looks like. And so in the stipulation, you might have things like the people with the disabilities must understand the question that's being asked, or the people with the disabilities must play an active role in like this particular stage of the research. And you end up with a description of inclusive research that contains points that somebody with a profound intellectual disability can never meet. And so the question that I'm looking at, or one of the questions that I'm looking at in my doctoral studies, is it possible to do research with people with a profound intellectual and multiple disability? And I don't mean like a little with, I mean like a big capital letter, like fully with. And so the intellectual work that I do around that is to try and conceptualize what we mean by research, because if we mean a thing based in words where we go out and find knowledge that is also word based, then obviously the answer is just a very simple no, because they don't have access to verbal communication or, you know, text to speech or any of that. We're talking about people with a level of intellectual disability that means that those things aren't possible, and that's not me having low expectations of them. That's just, there are people who have that level of intellectual disability. So how do we do research with them? And I've been looking, and you have to stop me because I will talk about this for far too long. I've been looking about finding a way that we can share a space as equals. And so I figured, where would that be? And it needs to be at the point before you start thinking things. It needs to be the present moment, and it needs to be an embodied state of being. And in the first research paper that I published as a part of my doctorate with the group of researchers that I'm working with, we described this as a mode of being. And somebody asked me to explain that the other day, and I really struggled because I was like, no, that's the best way I have of saying it. It's like, it's a way, anything that I add to that mode of being takes me slightly further away from what I mean. So it's like a state of being, it's a way of being. You feel it. And I see it written about in different places. I see people talking about attuning themselves to somebody with a profound intellectual disability, or sharing a resonance with them. And I think we're all talking about very similar things. But it's this kind of, so you share this present moment, this mode of being, and then what do we learn together in this moment? Like, what do we discover in this moment? And things that we discover as a we. And so I'm hoping, I've got two halves to my work. One is, how do I achieve that with of doing research inclusively with people with profound intellectual disabilities? And then my research topic is identity and belonging. So once I've figured out the how, I've got to go and do it. We've got to go and do some research together. And if I can't figure out the how, then I won't be able to do the second half. If I can figure out the how and I do the second half and it doesn't work, then I need to go back and ask the first question again. But if I can figure out the how, and then we can do, even if we just do like a little bit of research together, then I'll have said, you know, it's not, I'm just one researcher, and I'm not doing anything big or spectacular, but it would mean that nobody could say you can't do it. Because it's just like a little irritant, just like a little thing that stops that door from completely closing.
And people could take that blueprint that you're developing to potentially do other research.
I am not developing a blueprint.
No, you never know. You never know. You might inspire.
Just gonna try. I like your ambition, but it would take a long time.
You might inspire. You might spark a real change. You know, and this is really, I think this is really exciting. And yes, working both on the theory of how to approach it, and then on the practice of approaching it, doing it, and seeing if that changes the theory as well when you put it in practice, perhaps. So it'd be really interesting to get you back on the show once you've done the project.
Once I've got my blueprint,
you know, how it's gone. So the video is for later then, I guess.
Oh, well, no, so that was my preamble to the film. So I've been working with, or I've been trying to work with a group of people who have profound intellectual and multiple disabilities. And there's a big topic that we're just jumping over here, in that it's not a with if I force it on them. It has to be a consensual thing. And for people with profound intellectual disabilities, you would look at process, assent rather than consent. I'm just going to jump that because that's a massive topic, but feel free to ask me questions about it. Not that I will necessarily know the answers, but I have stuff to say. So these are people who I believe are willing to join me in the research process. And so I have 4 people that I'm working with currently. And the film that I'm going to show you is a little girl called Felicity. And I've been working with her I was going to say ages, but for most of the year, I've been trying to get into a space of being with Felicity, and I've been using Merleau-Ponty's philosophy to inform what I do. And so this is another topic that I mustn't get too distracted by, but Merleau-Ponty tries to describe the experience of consciousness. So that's a thing Felicity and I share. We're both conscious beings, so I can occupy consciousness with Felicity. And he says that the physical sciences, the natural sciences describe very well what actually happens in the world, but they're not describing your experience of living that happening. So to give an example, like when I pick up my drink to have a drink, what happens through the eyes of the natural sciences is that I think in my head, I'm thirsty, neurons fire and send messages down my arm that cause the expansion and contraction of muscles, and I raise and I draw. That's what actually happens. But that's not my experience of it happening. My experience of it happening, he says, you place your intention in the object, and then you experience your consciousness as a movement towards the world, which is just gorgeous, because like, yeah, totally, you kind of go drink and you just move towards it, don't you? And then you drink. And so I've been looking at that idea of where your intention is, because if I can find, it's like if the intention of my consciousness is here in this drink, if somebody else could spot that, you could sort of work your way back from the intention to the consciousness, couldn't you? Here's the consciousness, here's the intention, and I'd sort of have like a touch point to where, does that make sense? Somebody nod, or just go, no, you have lost. Thank you, nodding, Ruth. So when I've been working with these young people, I've been sitting there like trying to be with, and my phrase that I keep saying about being with is based on the work of Dr. Jill Goodwin, who is currently sat next to me on my view of this screen. So there's a whole topic there that when you ask the questions, ask her, not me. I'm there trying to, and the question that I'm asking myself as I occupy that time and that space and that presentness with that person is, where is your intention? And I have one young person that I work with, come and make friends with me on Facebook. I put my contact details up. You can see pictures. She's quite immobile when I spend time with her. So she's often on an achiever bed. So she's in like a hospital bed type setup. She's got very limited mobility and her hands are bent up by her face all the time. And I have tried to engage with her through copying her facial expressions, copying the sounds that she makes. And through asking this, where is your intention? I realized that her intention is here. She does this with them. She's like licking her finger. And you're like, actually, her intention is in a very small space. It's like this bit of her body is where her intention lies. Every so often, she experiences pain, and that intention is drawn to the pain, and you can't connect. But I've spent time with her, and I've tried to get into this little space. So literally, like, it's like I'm trying to place my intention where her intention is, and crawl into this little space with her. I put my finger to be licked, and I've come back, and you get this kind of touch point. You think, yeah, we're properly together. Sometimes you feel like it's there for quite a while, and other times it feels like you just touched and you were gone. But that point where it touches, that's my research space, and in that space I'll conduct the work. And the video that I still haven't showed you is of a little girl who I just haven't been able to do it. I've tried and tried, and I've sat there, and like we have a lovely time and she makes happy sounds, but I've never, like, if you took pictures of us interacting, you'd think it was great. It looks like a lovely conversation, but I'd never felt that touch point. And then I had a little moment where I realized, that's now a very dramatic introduction. Hopefully I get my screen share right. Let's go that one. Can you see?
Yes, so we can see.
So this is Felicity, and as you can see, there's no sound to this, so don't worry if you're not seeing sound. Her facial expressions don't change very often, and so it was difficult to make a connection with her that way. She does smile and she does laugh, but I never felt that that was real. And then I realized that she's in her fingers. She does these movements with her fingers, and she's a dancer. And if I place my intention in my fingers and my intention in her fingers, then I get to dance with her. And that's our version of being with. And I've only, like, I made this little montage just last week, I think. So this is very new for me, but I've only just realized it. And this is, I'm hoping, the opening up of my research space with Felicity, my little dancer.
That's so gorgeous. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, it gives me the warm feels just to see the video, and to know how, you know, challenging it was for you to, you know, get to that point of finding, you know, like the patience of finding, and also of being in your body so you can connect with the other person in a different way. I'm just curious about like that use of senses. Like, is it a bit of a trial and error? Like you try with, you know, touch and then voice and then, you know, smells, or do you just observe first? Like, how do you even approach that exploration and connection?
So the research that I'm sharing with you is just sort of one aspect of my practice, and this is very much focused on that with. You can look at communication in different ways. So this is me looking to do research with, but if I was looking for other forms of communication, like I might be looking to understand what somebody likes or doesn't like, or I might be looking, I mentioned that I run a thing called the Sensory Projects. The first Sensory Project was the Sensory Story Project, and sensory stories are a passion of mine. And so sensory stories, in a nutshell, are really concise texts. So they're like a haiku art form, because you get 8 to 10 sentences to tell a story. And then each sentence is partnered with a really rich sensory experience that appeals to one sensory modality and conveys the meaning of the sentence in some way. So for example, I have a sensory story that I love to tell that's about how stars are formed in stellar nurseries, and the start of stars are big hydrogen clouds of gas. And my sensory experience for that is a visual experience. I just chuck loads of confetti everywhere. And the dispersal of the particles in the confetti cloud is similar to the dispersal of the particles in the hydrogen cloud. So what you're experiencing at a visual level is meaningful in relation to the intellectual content that the story is conveying, but can be fully appreciated by somebody who has no access to cognition. And when you share sensory stories with people with very profound disabilities, you look to share the story in the same way every time. Because if you're living through like a complicated brain, you know, a brain that's being affected by epilepsy, a brain that doesn't necessarily have all the connections that a brain might have, you know, a brain that's configured in a different way, a lot of the time what you experience is just a kind of confusing soup of things happening, and, you know, it's just all, and bits of life are patterned. And so you quite often find, for example, when people with complex disabilities are being hoisted from their wheelchairs, that they become more active or more vocal. And that's because the people doing the hoisting often have a very sort of set procedure that they have to do. Like they go, red loops on, check, regular. And so there's like a little bit of sound that's always the same. There's a sensation that's always the same. And for a moment, a little patch of the world makes sense. And when the world makes sense at a sensory level, you can be more active into it. And so you see this vocalization and moving. And with a sensory story, you tell the story in the same way. Oh, I've just thought of another little video that I can show you that illustrates this. And I've got 1 minute to find it on my desktop. Hang on a minute, because it's going to illustrate it so much better than what I'm saying is. Because if you can tell the stories on repeat like that, you can build up an understanding of what's going on, and then people can start to answer the sorts of questions that you would ask typical people when they're experiencing stories like, what's your favorite part, or can you remember what happens next? And yes, I found it. It
Amazing.
still says 6:29 on my
Oh, it's all
screen,
good.
so
We're not, I'm French. We're not very
oh,
timely.
does that okay. Right, let's see if I can do. We
That's
didn't practice
definitely a
the
thing.
screen share on this one, so it won't necessarily work. But if I show you over here, so this, can you see? Right,
Yes.
hang on.
You might want to go full screen.
I do want to go full screen. You're quite right. I just can't see it because the button to click is underneath.
You can do it on the bottom right.
Can you see it now?
Oh yeah. On
Awesome.
no, we see the presenter view, but it's okay. We can see
I
it.
know I can fix that. I know how to fix that.
Oh yeah, that should do it.
There you go.
I think it's just taking a minute.
Is it just thinking about it?
Yes, it is now. Yes, we can see.
Okay, so this little girl is having a sensory story told about the experience of going kayaking. And this is the first time she has told that story.
Kayaking cake. Let's go.
Oh, it's pausing a bit. There you So she's being invited to touch the rubber of the wetsuit, to smell that green smell, because that's a particular smell. The zip, your life jacket, and you can see she's making distressed noises. She doesn't know why her parents are assaulting her with all of these different sensory objects. It's just another part of the confusing soup of experience for her. Her parents told her that story in the same way, using the same props multiple times, and this is her most recent trip kayaking.
Keek, we're going to practice kayaking.
Watch her hand
again.
She's brought it up, ready to put on her wetsuit.
Can you hear? Wetsuit gives you a squeeze.
She's dropped her face.
Neoprene smells like rubber and salt. Buoyancy aid to keep you safe.
You can see her
hear
body go
zip
still because she's focusing on hearing, and so she doesn't need to be doing the other things because she's concentrating on that hearing.
We will be paddling on the sea. Feel the swell and feel the spray. Paddling on the sea. Now it's time to cross the beach. Feel the sand on your feet. Can you feel that? Nice. Is it nice? Is it nice? Hold the toggle. Got to pull the kayak now. Drag the kayak. Now the sea gets loud as you get close. Happily, we will be paddling on the sea. Feel the swell and feel the spray. Paddling on the sea. At the shoreline, time to get in. Feel cold water wet your skin. Can you feel the water, Geek, on your feet? Now, sit up straight. You're already very straight. Correct position. Hold the paddle. Dig and pull. Dig and pull. Happily, we will be paddling on the sea. Feel the swell and feel the spray. Paddling on the sea.
Sorry, I let the whole thing play because it's just so much fun to watch her. But you can see the difference in how much access she has from the first telling to the second telling. The first telling is just something going on. The second telling is a little girl going kayaking.
That's so brilliant. Thank you for sharing. I love how quickly you were able to pull that as well. That's brilliant. Oh, it's, yeah, such a different experience. I know that, you know, we've run out of the formal time, but I do want to ask you one more question on the recording, and we'll just run over by a few minutes. If everyone wants in the meantime to also think about your questions, that's perfect opportunity. I did want to ask you a question about how that applies to neurodiversity, because I know that that's an area that you have lived experience in and you're also interested in. So so yeah, can you share a little bit about that? I know we don't have enough
Yeah,
time.
okay, yeah, so
level.
I'm an autistic woman. I'm very typical of the generation that got identified in adulthood. I have sensory differences, which I think help me in my work at the sensory projects, because they give me an appreciation of the sensory world that is possibly other. I certainly notice things a lot more, so maybe I'm better able to choose the resources for my sensory stories. Within my work as a researcher, it's been, so a lot of autistic people experience sensory overwhelm in the world in a variety of ways. And a lot of autistic people disassociate from their bodies because we are a population that have experienced a lot of trauma. And I couldn't tell you which, I don't know, but what I know is that for myself, I'm somebody who has survived in the world by disconnecting from those sensations so that I'm not overwhelmed by them. But my practice as a researcher demands that I be embodied. And it's a really tricky thing to demand of yourself. Like, how much are you in your body, or how much are you in your head? Like, are you actually feeling these things? And you need to do it at a really like sensory level, because part of our communication is shared through your interoception and things like this. And if I want to have gut instincts and stuff like that, I can't switch off what I'm feeling. So in order to do my work in the field, I've had to work on my own embodiment and my own processing and willingness to accept the sensory stimulation from the world around me, which was a really difficult part of figuring out how to do this at the start of last year. But I'm doing it. But the problem is I haven't figured out how to turn it off. So I now, so people who follow me online will know I spend a lot of time on trains. I do like 14 hours on the trains a week type of thing, but I'm standing on platforms and it is noisy and it is too bright, and I can feel the sun on my feet and then a shadow from somebody walking past on my feet, and it's so much noise. And that's something that I think is probably, I'm sure that everybody must experience that to some extent when they're doing like ethnographic style work. But as an autistic person, it's particularly challenging. It's one of the things that when you think, will I make it to the end of this PhD? That's one of the things that could mean that I don't.
Well, I really hope that you do, and I really hope that you come back to tell us more about the findings and the practical side, and especially that study around identity and belonging. Yeah, it's fascinating. So
Yeah.
it'd be amazing to, you know, hear more about that in a year and a half. You said roughly, you know, let's not put a timeline. Whenever you know, you're ready to come back, it'd be lovely. But yeah, thank you so much for sharing what you're doing with your research, with the sensory project, and also a bit about your lived experience. It's been really amazing to have you, and I'm sure everyone has learned something. So I'm looking forward to the questions. Before we get back to the live room with the questions, I'll just wrap up for those watching the recording. So anyone watching the recording, this is going to be the end of the recording, you have to join the live next time to have the opportunity to ask your questions. You can find the next episode on Eventbrite. It's going to be about Disability Pride. You can also follow on Instagram at Be Beyond Borders and check out the newsletter on the website. We have tons of episodes by now. I mean, this is season 2, episode 18. So if you haven't already, head to YouTube and subscribe to Be Beyond Borders channel and have a look at some of the previous episodes. Specifically season 2, which I started this year, has been focused on disability and neurodiversity. So if you're interested in these topics, that's something to bookmark for next time. And for anyone watching the recording, we're going to end the recording now. So see you for episode 19. Thank you so much for watching.